Good morning. I'd like to start this morning with a moment of silence and to reflect on any spiritual experience that you may have had in your life. Thank you. Golf is not a spiritual experience for me. Are any of you golfers? See some hands? Yep, a few. There's always a few. I grew up playing sports in Massachusetts, and mostly baseball and hockey, which involves swinging a bat or a stick. And when I started my business career, it was suggested that I take up golf because that was the sport that a lot of business people play. I thought I'd be pretty good at it because I grew up swinging a bat at a baseball and a hockey stick at a hockey puck. And how hard could it be to hit a little white golf ball with a club? So I went out to play my first golf game, and I gripped the club like a baseball bat, and I swung that club as hard as I possibly could at that little white golf ball, which is exactly what you're not supposed to do. And I missed the ball completely and almost toppled over into the grass in embarrassment. My second attempt at hitting the ball was much better, and I launched the ball well over 200 yards, but 150 of those yards went directly into the woods, losing my golf ball. So I struggled through that first match and immediately decided that I needed to go to golf school to really learn how to play correctly. And after the first day of lessons, the golf pros suggested that I take a week off and then quit entirely for good because I was a really bad golfer. So since that first attempt at playing golf, I've recognized a pattern in my learning experiences. An experience, our own human experience, is at the heart of Unitarian Universalism, according to Tendayaka, a highly regarded black female theologian and process philosopher who taught at the University of Chicago, received her PhD from Claremont Graduate University, and who is also a Unitarian Universalist minister. I'm sure some of you have heard of her. Nina and I studied some of her work when we were in seminary. An experience is also the title of an essay by my hero, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson's essay, Experience, begins with a poem. The poem describes the solemn procession of the Lords of life, the forces that affect all human experience of life. God, in the poem, the inventor of this game we call life, is an unnamed loving presence in his poem. Human beings walk in confusion among the lords of life and are comforted by nature and by the presence of this loving God, according to Emerson. Nature assures human beings that the Lord will wear another face tomorrow, and Emerson explores the action of these forces on the way we live and understand our lives. Which is one reason, I think, why we come to this fellowship on Sunday morning. We want to understand life. We want to understand our place in the universe. We want to know why bad things happen to good people. We want to know why spouses die at a young age from cancer. We want to know why children die from overdoses of drugs. And we want to know how far our systems got so far out of whack. Don't we, Richard? Richard and I had a long discussion about this. The experience of life can be confusing, and gaining perspective on life while we are engaged in living it can be difficult. This confusion affects our perception of our place in the universe, of our relationship to nature, to each other, and to our own power. As a society, I think we have a lot to learn, and our faith has some important lessons to teach our society, and we should share them in any manner that we can. With regards to my own learning experiences, I'm usually the guy who puts the IKEA furniture together upside down and backwards. And then I read the manual and figure out why it's upside down and backwards. So experiences, good and bad, have always been my best teachers. And there is so much overlap and synchronicity between Unitarian Universalism and process philosophy that I find simply delightful. And I know I'm a little weird when it comes to philosophy and religion, and I appreciate you all putting up with my excitement the past few months that I've been here. It really makes me excited when I get that aha moment about philosophy or cosmology or some aspect of religion. When I dine with a famous Unitarian Universalist theologian like Tendeka, and she tells me at the core of Unitarian Universalism is our own experience. And then I remember Emerson's essay called Experience. And when then the famous process theologian John Cobb, who's sitting right across the table from me at dinner, explains to me that Whitehead's process philosophy begins in human experience, not in human thoughts or thinking, as many philosophies do, well, I tell you, this really floats my boat. So to backtrack a bit, I was at a 2-day conference in Claremont last week on the future of process philosophy. And there were theologians and philosophers from all over the country there, and a few international theologians. Many were Unitarian Universalists, surprisingly, including Tendeka. And John Cobb invited me to sit at his dinner table with Tendeka because he knew he had that Unitarian Universalist thing going on. For a blue-collar philosopher like myself to be sitting with Unitarian Universalist royalty, if there is such a thing, like Tendeka, and also, in my opinion, the greatest living process philosopher, John Cobb, at the same dinner table, well, I tell you, it was quite a thrill for me. The conversation, however, did not go very well, at least in the beginning. There were 2 other UUs at the table with us. One was a seminarian, my friend Kathleen Jacobson from Claremont, and the other was a Unitarian Universalist rocket scientist. You all know the type, and there are some in this congregation, I'm sure. Scientists with PhDs who have an incredible breadth of scientific knowledge, who are fascinating to listen to, but when they get deep into their area of expertise, whoosh, right over my head. I don't have any idea what they're talking about. Well, Tim Eastman was at our table, and he really is a literal Unitarian Universalist rocket scientist. Tim is known for the discovery of gyro-phase bunched plasma. No idea what that is. He spent much of his career studying this while managing interagency programs between NASA headquarters and the National Science Foundation. A real rocket scientist. Tim wrote a book on physics and Alfred North Whitehead, so he is also a scientific process philosopher. And though I don't know what color his collar is, perhaps gold-plated when it comes to science, religion, and philosophy. I can't say that I was uncomfortable in the conversation between Tendeka and Dr. Cobb and Dr. Eastman around science and religion, but I was having some trouble following it. It felt like my old technology business days, listening to the chief technology officer at my customer Microsoft discussing technology with the chief technology officer from my company that I last worked for, ServiceNow. I could follow along and knew what was being discussed, but please don't ask for my opinion. The conversation turned to church life and the inevitable complaining about the decline of the Protestant and liberal church and its future. I asked Tendeka her thoughts and advice on how to grow Unitarian Universalist churches, and she immediately asked me what I was doing. I told her that I was doing some work with 2 different churches, one in Sunnyvale and one in Claremont, as well as working with John Cobb, trying to get the newly named Cobb Institute for Process and Practice in Claremont off of the ground. What advice can you give me, Tendeka? I know you have consulted with hundreds of churches and taught many seminarians and ministers. Tell me more about what you're doing, she said. Well, we're having a series of sermons on Unitarian Universalist history, how it intersects with process thought, and then some small group conversations after the service. I was sure she would like that, being a UU scholar, theologian, and a process philosopher. But she said, why would you do that? Well, I said, I think there is a lot of good theology in Unitarian Universalist history that we sometimes forget and we need to recover. Alfred North Whitehead, as the creator of process thought, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Tandeka, was not a linear thinker, but encouraged us to try and comprehend the world by returning over and over again to all the different aspects of the world, whether it's science or religion or art or music or math or philosophy, keeping in mind the interconnectedness of everything. For me, Unitarian Universalism, especially our worship services and small group ministry, can make process philosophy concrete. Would you agree, Tandeka? She ignored my question again and asked, well, what is so good about our theology? At this point, I was beginning to feel a little annoyed because she would not stop asking me questions and would not answer any of mine. To respond to her question about what is good about our theology, I told her that what had always appealed to me about Unitarian Universalism was the optimistic view of human nature and of God. That the uncontrolling love of God was available to all of us, regardless of how unlovable we might feel or behave, and that I had had a personal experience of this uncontrolling love that allowed me to get sober from drugs and alcohol 28 years ago, a story I really had not planned on telling at this dinner with her or John Cobb. Tandeka opened her eyes wide and practically shouted, "Yes!" She startled John Cobb and the other guests at our table. She then told us all her story of growing up with an intellectual, overbearing Baptist minister father who read endless philosophical texts to her about God and man, caught up in the throes of the great existential crisis of his era, society's feelings of angst, anxiety, futility, meaninglessness, pain, suffering, and despair that made so many theologians of his era talk about the death of God and the loss of a transcendent meaning or purpose. But talking about those feelings at the personal level with his own daughter did not merit her father's attention. Talking about those kinds of feelings was not rational in her father's view, and reason was not just one way of defining Tandeka's identity in her family, it was the only way, according to her autobiography, which I also have read. Like so many of us yesterday and today, Tandeka learned how not to express her emotions, her pain, her suffering, her desire for real connection, her longing for a community, her desire for God, a yearning for love. In her blog series on the internet, she writes this about her suicide attempt in college. "I do not understand why you tried to commit suicide," Tandeka's student counselor said as he stood over her hospital bed. "Your grades are terrific. You have been accepted into Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. And in a class of 5,000, you are graduating as one of our top 100 most active students. You are lucky the pills did not kill you." What the school counselor did not know, Tandeka wrote, was that in my near-death experience from the overdose of pills was also an experience of the breath of life sweeping over me and into the deep recesses of my lungs. I felt life without end, joy without remorse, and an unbounded love that resounded through me like the heartbeat of God. All of life moved me, and I felt at home in my life, at one with the universe, and free. I no longer wanted to die. I felt loved beyond belief. Love beyond belief, beyond rational thought. It reminds me that Whitehead wrote that human beings are at best intermittently rational. So Tandeka is a big proponent of this idea of small group ministry. We spent the rest of the evening sharing our personal stories. John Cobb had a brother who committed suicide. an event that John writes extensively about in his autobiography. My son made a suicide attempt a few years ago. We all shared deeply and had quite a few laughs as the evening wore on. We were all very grateful to be connected to each other in our small group and for the love beyond belief that was showed to us by our friends and our religious communities of which we are a part in our time of great anguish. The road can indeed get muddy and rough, and heaven knows I can't get there without my religious communities. May it be so.